Hello, lovely ladies and gentlemen. You are listening to the Line Podcast, recorded this beautiful Friday morning, September 13th, 2024. Matt and I are going to take a look ahead at the craziness of this week. It's been nuts in federal politics, and that just before Parliament is heading directly back into session. We're also going to be talking about some hot goss buried in the bottom of a book review, and a tiny little bit about the Conservatives' Online Harms Act. That's for this week at the Line Podcast.
This episode of the Line Podcast has been brought to you by Unsmoke Canada. Canada can be a global leader in reducing the harm caused by smoking, but it requires actionable steps, including giving adult smokers the information they need to choose potentially less harmful alternatives. Learn more at unsmoke.ca. So before we jump into this, I'm just going to gently tease Jen. It's been a chaotic morning for her because we had her running around all over the city trying to figure out where she could record the podcast because her power was out. Jen, are there any utilities in Calgary that are working well these days?
At this point, nothing can be assured. I think we need to reset our expectations. And by that, I mean reset our expectations to the third world. No, there does seem to be some weird thing that happened with the Calgary power outage. I don't think it's going to be a major one. It just happened to hit a part of the city that I'm in. But we came back. I have lights. I have internet. Everything's fine.
And I don't necessarily have let there be light.
I don't necessarily have full access to water. But I have dry shampoo, so everything's fine.
Well, you know what? Look, me here in Toronto, I can laugh about the power, I can laugh about the water, but I'm going to encourage all Line readers to check out my Friday column. I can't laugh about everything. So,
certainly not the crime.
Let's talk federal politics. And I'm just got my notepad right here. It's going to be really friggin' hard to actually figure out chapter markers today because it's like a blob of federal politics and then like two short notes. But I want to start by mentioning the carbon tax. The carbon tax is something, if I never have to talk about the fucking carbon tax again for the rest of my life, like I'm going to be perfectly content with that. But this week, the NDP began making noises around, we love carbon taxation. We gotta save the climate, blah, blah, blah. But we don't necessarily love this carbon tax because it doesn't land on corporations. It lands on working people. And look, we're going to let the politics of this all shake out. We're going to let it do what it's going to do. But I don't know. I feel like I'm just kind of we could probably just like go drop in like an entire segment of a podcast we recorded months ago and see if anyone notices. The moment the Liberals took a step back from the carbon tax on home heating oil and from Atlantic Canada, the economic rationale for the carbon tax still exists, but they killed the political rationale for it. You cannot have, like, if you want to be a ruthless, egg-headed technocrat, you can go out and defend a policy 100% on the economics and dare the voters to disagree with you. If you want to defend this policy politically, the moment the Liberals made their first retreat, they doomed it. And it took longer than I thought to start to see it unravel here. But I'm honestly wondering, and I don't know, and we're actually going to talk about this a bit more in a minute, one of our other topics here. The Liberals are going to find themselves in a situation, I think they might already be finding themselves in a situation, where they got cannons to the left of them, cannons to the right of them. They're all volleying and thundering here, and they're all targeting the carbon tax. Can Justin Trudeau go into the next election defending the carbon tax as it exists? When the Conservatives are against it, the NDP seems to be moving against it. And in BC, David Eby, the premier, the NDP premier, said if it wasn't for the federal backstop, he'd scrap BC's carbon tax, the one that was the model for it everywhere else. Is this something the Liberals are going to be able to defend, or are they going to have to retreat?
Interesting. I'm not sure that there's any benefit in their retreating because they gain nothing by the retreat. Right? That's an interesting problem. So I do want to talk about the politics of this because I think it's interesting. So one thing that I know some pedants are going to be in our feeds about is saying, well, this isn't any huge change from the NDP. The NDP have always wanted a more corporate-focused carbon tax, or they wanted a cap and trade, or blah, 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 blah. Ironically, they want something closer to what already exists in Alberta with the tier program, right? So this is a heavily corporate or a heavy industrial emitter-based carbon tax, right? So this doesn't necessarily represent some radical shift from previous policy for them. What is different here, and what I think changes the political narrative on it, is that this sort of news story on the carbon tax comes after Jagmeet Singh ripped up, quote unquote, the confidence and supply agreement, right? So that again, we can make the argument about what that changes in reality, but what changes is the perception, and what changes is the political narrative as a result of his decision to do that. So if
everything's a knife fight now.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
If you rip up CASA and then the next week you come forward and say we're against the Liberals' signature policy and their signature their signature carbon tax. Sorry, I apologize. That was a beep. And they rip up their signature
phone calls in the first minute of the puck.
I know, of course. And they're going to rip up their signature policy right after that. Firstly, I have to note that this is incredibly poor political strategy once again from Jagmeet Singh, because now what's going to happen is that we already know that the Conservatives are going to come back to Parliament, and either this week or the next, they're going to launch a confidence motion specifically worded on the carbon tax. And Pierre Poilievre has already come out in a press release and said, we're going to have a confidence motion on the carbon tax. We're going to call a carbon tax election. And what is Singh going to do? You think Singh's going to vote in favor of the confidence motion? Like, no, he's going to vote to continue to prop up the government in opposition to the quote unquote ripped up CASA, and also in opposition to the carbon tax that he's just gone against. So like every single time that Singh manages to win a one-day news cycle, he's sacrificing his medium to long-term credibility and his ability to criticize the government, because the Conservatives are going to call him on all of this stuff the second that Parliament's back in session. Yeah. So that I'm going to note once again, just terrible political strategy. Like for the NDP to go against the Liberals' carbon tax is actually good politics, but it's good tactics, but it's bad strategy. That's kind of the way I would phrase it, and I think that is a problem that Singh has demonstrated that he's had up until now. Secondly, I want to go back to the EB point. So, Premier Eby, as you noted, basically also came out against the Liberal carbon tax. There was an interesting tweet. I think I sent it to you. I can't remember if it was from Andrew Weaver himself or it was a quote from Andrew Weaver, so I'll have to double check that. But the Green Party's the former leader of the BC Green Party basically said that he would support the Conservatives' John Runstad instead of Eby because of Eby's stance on the carbon tax. And that's a really interesting political realignment, because it suggests that there might actually be a lot of movement on the ecology, Green Party-y vibe side of Canadian politics toward the Conservatives over the NDP over environmental issues. And isn't that kind of interesting and funny? It sets up an interesting political realignment that I think might be worth watching, because it might be replicated in other places. So those were
like talked about that before. A lot of this makes sense in the context of a really big political realignment, because people who've been doing this longer, like you and I, Coyne, Ibbotson, like a lot of us have noted that Liberals don't talk like Liberals, Dippers don't talk like Dippers, and Tories don't talk like Tories anymore. And on a day-to-day level, we can go, oh, they're craven, opportunistic politicians, blah, blah, blah. But it might actually be something more structural and fundamental than that. What a Conservative Party of Canada stands for, what the Liberal Party of Canada stands for, what the New Democratic Party of Canada will stand for, might be fundamentally changing in ways that are going to leave us weirdos in the dust, confused and dazed.
And I think it's a lot less, and I think it has a lot less to do with ideology and a lot more to do with what I would call sort of cultural coziness, right? Increasingly, for example, blue-collar workers in Canada are finding that the Conservatives talk like them, they think like them, right? Like even if they happen to be unionized, who are they aligning with? They're aligning with people who share a lot of the more fundamental values around institutional power, around family, around faith, around all of these kinds of more culturally important issues than around ideology, right? So it's an interesting alignment on a couple of different fronts, and it has a lot more to do with
identity politics, right? Yeah. Diaspora politics or cultural identity politics.
Sure. Cultural identity politics would probably be a good way to put it. So anyway, that put a pin in that, because I think that what I just said about what's going to happen to Jagmeet Singh in the first 2 weeks of this election. Sorry, the election. Oh God, that was Freudian, wasn't it?
Of the session.
Yeah. The first 2 weeks of this session, I mean, he's going to pay very dearly for the news cycles that he bought in the last 2 weeks.
I know. I know. Does he?
Well, this is a good question. So which brings us to the question and the rumor that is continually spreading around Ottawa that the Liberals are going to prorogue Parliament. I don't know how seriously to take these rumors, to be honest with you, because as far as I can tell, there are 3.5 options for the Liberals at this point. I talked about them in the last week in the podcast. Those 3 options haven't fundamentally changed. It's either you drop the writ now, you prorogue and buy yourself some time, or you just brazen it out and see if you can get to the next fixed election date in October. I don't know which of those options the Liberals are going to take, but I think that every single option is fraught with very serious consequences and no guarantees. So, there's no good choices left for the Liberals at this point. And in that environment, I can understand where the logic for proroguement comes in. So, how proroguement would actually work in the first couple of weeks would be everybody comes back to the House. The Conservatives put a confidence motion on the floor as soon as they possibly can. This leads to internal knife fighting with both the NDP and the Bloc trying to gun for particular concessions in order to support the Liberals. Maybe they get concessions, maybe they don't. But the Liberals look around and say, well, wait a minute, how many more of these confidence motions are the Conservatives seriously going to put forward? And the answer is as many as they possibly the fuck can, because every incentive is structured in such a way for the Liberals to maximize their non-confidence motions, because every single failed non-confidence motion is a bucket load of fundraising money for them, plus news cycle, plus the opportunity to humiliate Jagmeet Singh, plus potentially the opportunity to humiliate Yves Blanchet, the head of the Bloc Party.
Yves François Blanchet.
Yeah, see, well, I'm Alberta. No one can expect me to speak those French names proper.
I don't speak French, but I can say your name.
I don't speak French good. Nobody expects that from me. But anyway, point being, the Conservatives are absolutely aligned to try and ram through as many of these confidence motions as humanly possible, even knowing that they'll fail. And the Liberals might take one look at this and say, the next year of our lives cannot be this. This is absolutely bananas.
Oh, it sure can be.
Oh, it sure can be. And that might lead to Justin Trudeau getting up in front of the media and saying, we can't possibly function in such a dysfunctional environment. We're therefore going to prorogue Parliament while we get our bearings and figure out how to get through the next year together in a more functional way. And then the question starts to be, well, how long can they get away with proroguing Parliament for? Right? And legally, the answer might be till they have to pass another supply motion. So the budget. Legally, if they manage to do
6 months, my understanding is they've got about 6 months of government funding.
Yes, but unless they pull the same trick that they pulled during COVID, where they try to increase the supply using an order in council, in which case, legally, could they get away with proroguing Parliament until the fixed election date in October next year? The answer is...
I think what you said last week was right, though. At a certain point, they'd be pushing Canadian society to a breaking point, and I don't know if they would do that.
I think that they would do that. But no, I don't think there's anything that morally prevents them internally from doing that. The thing that I think would prevent them from doing that is if you were trying to be a very Machiavellian approach to this, how many weeks of proroguement can I buy before I get riots on the streets? I think the answer is somewhere between 1.5 to 6 months. I don't think you can actually buy a year without transparency or accountability, and I really think
they could write it out. Yeah. I think they could write it out for as long as the government was funded. I think where they would run into trouble is when they had to resort to unusual shenanigans to try and extend things beyond.
Yeah.
So, but I mean, pragmatically speaking, and look, I'm with you. I don't know if they're going to do this. I've heard the rumors. I don't know if they will.
And we have to put the caveat here. Nobody knows whether or not they're actually going to push that button. We're very much speculating. And I don't think the Liberals know whether or not they're going to push that button until probably 11 p.m. on Sunday. You know what I mean?
Karina Gould had a pretty declarative statement this week, at least by Liberal standards, where she was asked a yes or no question. And instead of saying no, Like she was asked, yes or no, are you going to prorogue? And instead of saying no, she says, I expect to be at work on Monday. So
that means no proroguement until at least Tuesday.
Well, I mean, just on the timeline of it all, if I was advising them and if the assumption was, yes, they're going to do it, I do it immediately and I keep it until after the U.S. election.
No, see, I wouldn't do it immediately. I would wait until there was a week of shenanigans in Parliament, which would give me cover to do it.
Okay. Yeah.
I would
just rip the Band-Aid off, but yeah, I hear you.
Yeah, I would wait until the Parliament comes back in session and the Conservatives fail in their confidence motion, and then they can say, these bad faith political procedural dramas by the Conservative will make it impossible for us to serve Canadians in Parliament, and our only choice is to... And yes, I think that the lowest risk option would be proroguement till after the American election, till you can see whether or not you're going to be dealing with like Trump fever or Kamala, whatever. And then you don't prorogue Parliament so long that you manage to get people organized in the streets against you. Right?
You get through the by-elections, you get through the U.S. election.
And then
you come
by
back
the time
to the front speech in December, and then everybody goes home for Christmas. Like that's how I would try to time it out. But
yeah. And then basically you reset the session in such a way that you have as few sitting days as possible until the next election. That would make sense. Like I said, we're talking strategy. We're not talking morality. We're not like justifying those choices.
Morality? What's that?
Well, I still think that you're going to run into the same problems that Harper ran into when he tried to avoid a confidence motion using proroguement. And that's fucked. That's not what proroguement's supposed to be used for.
Do you remember CAP, C-A-P-P, the Facebook group?
No.
Canadians Against Proroguing Parliament.
Oh, my husband was probably involved in that. He's a nerd.
He actually led some protests. It was almost 20 years ago. But boy, did we used to have different problems.
Yeah, didn't we just? It all looks so quaint in hindsight, doesn't it? Anyway, so like, look, that's a possibility, but I don't want to go into it too deep because like, we don't know if that's what they're going to do. They don't know whether or not that's what they're going to do. The other option that's on the table, and this is what I wrote a column about this week, was the possibility of an alliance between, like a formal alliance between the Liberals and the Bloc Québécois.
Even an informal one could work.
Even an informal one could work. I mean, they really only have to survive one more confidence motion if they play their cards right. We'll say, for example, through proroguement or whatever, but there's one really important confidence motion that they have to survive, and that's going to be the budget in March. April or March? I can't remember. I have to check the date. But anyway, I'm just assuming it's March. I should check. Anyway.
Normally around March.
Yeah, it's usually around March. So then the question is, well, what's the Bloc gonna demand in exchange for that alliance? We do have a partial list of goodies already that we know that the Bloc would be demanding in exchange for that. And bluntly, the big one from a monetary point of view is they're looking to extend OAS benefits for people between the ages of 65 and 674 so that those people get the same amount of money as people above the age of 75. And no offense to all of our older listeners, but that's a bad idea. It puts an extraordinary strain on an already fiscally tenuous situation, not to mention representing a pretty extraordinary degree of intergenerational wealth from the poorest demographics in this country to the richest demographics in this country. Like, I realize that there are going to be individuals who are between the ages of 65 and 74 who are going to be like, I'm not rich, I need that OAS money. And I'm like, blessings upon your head and I wish you well. But like, demographically speaking, you are the wealthiest demographic in not only in existence right now, but in Canadian history. So creating more and more entitlement programs for the country's old at the expense of the country is young is going to create massive intergenerational fairness, exacerbate existing intergenerational fairness issues, as well as just massively meddling in our fiscal sort of stability in the long run. Like we're talking billions of dollars in perpetuity here in order to buy that. And then to buy the Liberals what? What does that buy the Liberals?
Okay.
Right?
See, I had told you as kind of one of my topics, I wanted to actually respond directly to your column, and you turned a little pale, but don't worry, it's a good response. You have written your column almost as a letter to the Liberals. Yeah. Where it was...
Don't do this.
Yeah, but I think the way you phrased it was apt, right? You would ask the question, if you do this, what are you going to do with the time you buy yourself? And you wrote that politically. So you cut a deal with the Bloc, formally or otherwise, and you extend the government another 6 or 12 months. You were asking, what will you do with that time?
Right.
And I thought that was a great column. Really enjoyed it. The readers loved it as well. So thumbs up to you.
Go me.
Reading it, I had a little bit of the opposite take, which is to say that I agreed with you. But if I were writing that letter to the Liberals, I would have not asked what they want to do. I would have asked what they want to avoid. And because let's go with the themes, why is this a hard sentence to pronounce? Let's go with the same thesis. There we go. Nailed it. So, your thesis.
Mm-hmm.
My message to the Liberals is, would that 12 months, 6 to 12 months of bargaining and maneuvering, are you going to feel good about yourselves at the end of it? Like, do you feel where your self-esteem is today is likely to be higher or lower than it would be after 6 to 12 months of scraping by a series of like nail biter non-confidence motions with the Bloc or the NDP on an ad hoc basis? You asked you put the positive like framing around it. What would you do with the extra time? My sense of it was just, what will the extra time cost you? And I don't mean money to the treasury. I don't mean billions in new OAS payments. I just mean, we're talking, I told you a couple of minutes ago when we were talking about the carbon tax that I wanted to talk about this then. If the Liberals have to try and survive another 6 to 12 months, what are they going to have to sacrifice to do it? And maybe do they just want to get it over with now?
Well, I think
will they be able to look themselves in the mirror in 18 months, 24 months, when they're all back at their law firms or whatever? Are they going to feel better or worse if this government lasts another year?
Let's synthesize these 2 points. Okay. So for $7 billion annually in perpetuity and your souls, you buy yourself potentially from here another 13 months in power. What's the trade-off? What do you gain from that? Okay, so you get forward a pretty paltry, pretty pathetic national school program. Maybe you're around. Sorry, I think you just made yourself mute. I didn't hear you.
Oh, yeah, my mistake. I was just saying the national food program. Yeah,
national food program. National school, but it's a school lunch program, which is not going to serve all kids and isn't going to be well funded enough to provide particularly decent lunches. And to me, looks like a government boondoggle waiting to happen. But sure, okay, there's that. You push through the remainder of a fairly half-assed pharmacare program through the Senate, but that isn't more extensive because bluntly you can't afford it. You also can't afford what the Bloc wants you to support, but that's another conversation entirely. So what are you gaining with that time? What are you selling for that time? Like, what are you selling? What's the exchange here? And I think that the only answer I can come up with is 13 more months with Pierre Poilievre not in power is a good 13 months. That's the only logic that I can come with. And I'm like, okay, but let's also be real clear about what the cost of keeping Pierre Poilievre in power for the next.
That's more my question, right?
You're
looking at
13
gain,
months.
I'm looking at the cost.
Yeah. So what the cost of keeping Pierre out of power for another 13 months, bluntly against the overwhelming will of the plurality of Canadians, is potentially you lose your party.
Mm-hmm. And your souls. I know that sounds so.
Yeah, I know, but that's already we're treating liberal souls as table stakes here. Okay, we've already accepted that. But the thing that I think that this is something that they're still very much in Delulu land about is they still think that themselves as the natural governing party, and even if we have one bad election, we're just going to bounce back. And I'm like, okay, cool. Tell that to the Ontario Liberals. Tell that to the Alberta
all
Liberals.
The provincial Liberal parties in their multitude.
Tell that to the BC Liberals. Yeah. Let's have a conversation about what's happened to the natural governing party at the provincial level, and ask ourselves: are you really immune to that? Are you really immune to that? And I think that what I just cannot. I'm trying to communicate this in good faith, and I realize it's not going to be interpreted this way. But every week that the Liberals continue to draw their very tenuous hold on power out against the will of the Canadian people is a week in which they are firstly continuing the momentum in the fundraising capital of the Conservative Party. They're also building resentment and anger with ordinary people. And
The folks.
the folks, and the longer you draw this out, the less of a chance that you are going to have anything to rebuild from. And I realize I say that and people are just like, I think they can't conceptualize what I'm talking. Like, they can't conceptualize the idea that the existing Liberal Party can be Kim Campbell. And I'm like, it can be Kim Campbell easily, and it can be Kim Campbell within 5 to 10 years. You know what I'm saying? I'm not talking like at this pace that you're going, there will be no Liberal Party very soon. So, but you know, they're never going to listen to me on that front because I'm just, you know, an asshole Albertan. So whatever, moving on.
I actually, well, first of all, yes, you are. I can confirm that.
No, that's true. Not wrong.
I think I had this is a column in that I'm going to write sometime in the near future. It's not top of my list, but it's pretty high near the list. And if the news cycle keeps going the way it's going, I'm going to put it higher on the list. It's just on my little columnist scrapbook. I had a really interesting experience after the 2018 Ontario election. That was the one where Doug Ford won his first majority. And to your point a minute ago, the Ontario Liberal Party got wiped out. Mm-hmm. And what was incredible to me was how many Ontario Liberals quietly approached me, some of them the night of, but some of them took a few months. And it said to me, yeah, you know what, Matt, you were right. And we thought at the time that you were just some Ford-loving Tory right-wing hack asshole. And you were writing things about us, and you were trying to warn us on things, and we should have listened. And look, I'm not gonna. It wasn't like a parade to my door, right? I don't want to overstate the case, but it was more than a few. And I'm wondering who will be the first federal Liberal, and how long will it take for them to start adopting policies that sound an awful lot like what we've been writing for the last 2 years. And a lot of it will be in private. Much of it won't be public. But yeah, and then honestly, Jen, I'm with you. I think we're going to start seeing probably, like when we're recording this, the Nanaimo caucus retreat is either wrapped up or wrapping up. Mm-hmm. I'm curious to see in the next couple of weeks who announces they're leaving. The Liberals have had MPs and cabinet ministers already saying they're not coming back. We talked last week about Jeremy Broadhurst, the PMO, and was intended to be the Liberal campaign director. He tapped out. So I think kind of what I said a minute ago, that like I'm encouraging them to think of their souls and to think about what the next 6 to 12 months of just being forced into one sacrifice through another, because it's going to happen. Do you want to do that? So at the top level, that might be a reason to call the election now. But if that's not going to happen, people are going to start making personal choices, and we'll hear about MPs that aren't running again, that people who have suddenly remembered they need families they want to go spend time with. Not all of them. Some of them are going to go down with the ship. Some of them are going to be in the Fuhrer bunker with the leader, blah, blah, blah. Pick your metaphor, but some of them are going to start getting it.
And the flip side to my own argument here, and the devil's advocate argument that I would play here, is that what are the two things? You're going to devil's advocate
yourself?
Yes, I'm going to devil's advocate myself. Okay. How do the Liberals hang on as a party in the long term? And I would say two things. One, you become a regional party in Atlantic Canada, so you maintain enough support in Atlantic
Quebec
Canada.
Or something like that.
Yeah, probably Atlantic Canada though. Which would have the Liberals be a kind of regional rump party. That's a possibility. Or the other potential thing going for the Liberals is that the NDP is beclowning itself so completely that the Liberals could just reinvent themselves as a unabashedly left-wing party.
Well, the Ontario Liberals have a path back, it is over the desiccated husk of the Ontario NDP.
That's right. And Jagmeet Singh, to our earlier point, is doing everything possible to make that happen for the Liberals. Mm-hmm. So, I can't rule that out. I don't know what the future is going to bring. All I'm going to say is if they maintain the trajectory that they're on right now, I don't think they're being connected. I don't think that they're highly rooted in consensus reality in terms of what their immediate future brings. And I'm also not sure, like I said, all of these sacrifices are potentially worthwhile if what you're buying with that 13 months
and it doesn't cost you your soul.
Yeah, you know what I mean? Like if what you're buying with that 13 months is something truly transformative, if what you're buying with that 13 months is a vision for the country that you want people to rally behind, then you can go down with honor. You know what I mean? Like there's something there, but there's nothing. There's nothing there.
my view, if I was advising, and I think I said this on the podcast last week, like my advice to the Liberals, I offered this advice neutrally, is stop thinking about winning and start thinking about how you want to lose. What is, like, when the next election is over, what ground do you still want to hold? And that's why I'm trying to tell them the next 6 to 12 months, don't sell your souls. Don't be forced by the day-to-day tactical realities to selling things you're never going to be able to get back. To your point about them retreating to Atlantic Canada, my thought of sort of the last bastion of a Liberal Party that is sort of reduced to a smaller party on a permanent basis would be a hyper-technocratic, white-collar urban party. Now, that party might have appeal in Atlantic Canada, but I could see in a sort of a worst-case scenario for the Liberals that they kind of become almost overtly the party of Toronto, Montreal, and Ottawa, and maybe some Atlantic Canada ridings, and even maybe weirdly, the odd riding in Calgary and Edmonton and Vancouver. But the kind of almost like they're going to give up on being a brokerage party for urban, suburban, and rural ridings, and they're just going to be, we are the party of the affluent white collar.
Yeah, we're the party of silence or science. We're the follow the evidence party. That kind of branding. Yeah, I could see that, but again, you're still looking at rump party status.
Oh yeah, I know.
Right.
All right, you know what? There's no logical place to get a chapter break in this one, but I'm going to propose a like and subscribe, because when I come back in a minute, I want to read you a quote from a Liberal MP.
Like and subscribe, and check us out at www.readtheline.ca.
Like and subscribe. This episode of The Line Podcast has been brought to you by Unsmoke Canada, which is dedicated to helping Canadians who are looking to quit smoking understand the full range of options available. Despite decades of government programs and regulations, today, nearly 5 million Canadian adults smoke cigarettes. Adult smokers who choose to continue to smoke should be aware that other options exist. Right now, accessing information about these options is heavily restricted in Canada. While not risk-free, alternatives such as heated tobacco and vaping products provide a potentially less harmful choice than cigarettes. Cigarettes burn tobacco, resulting in smoke that contains 6,000 harmful chemicals that are associated with smoking-related disease and death. Heated tobacco and vaping products have the potential to significantly reduce this risk. Health agencies around the world are now considering these alternatives to help end smoking. Updated laws can help adult smokers better understand the full range of options available, including the relative risks of these products. Millions of Canadians smoke cigarettes. Technology exists that can help change that, but policymakers need to take actions. Learn more about how a smoke-free future can be achieved at unsmoke.ca. I want to read you something.
Hit me.
This was from a Canadian press report. And the Canadian press is actually having kind of a banger week, because we've already said to the listeners and the viewers, there's no logical place to drop a like and subscribe break in this gigantic blob of federal politics. So we kind of had to do it somewhat arbitrarily. But Canadian press has had two really juicy quotes this week. The first one speaks to what we were talking about in the last segment, sort of about the Liberals selling their souls. Did you read the unnamed Bloc official talking to the Canadian press, who just gave the most ruthlessly pragmatic and honest appraisal of Canadian politics? There's something about the Bloc. They can say shit about Canadian politics that almost no one else can. Mm-hmm. And I don't like the Bloc, and I would never ever want to support them, but my God, do they ever see through the bullshit sometimes. And it was this Bloc guy who was talking to the CP who basically said, oh yeah, we're going to squeeze the Liberals for everything we can think we can get out of them before like the Polyev train obliterates the Liberal Party forever. And it was like so ruthless that I just like, yeah, you know what? Like,
I don't like the Bloc, but I respect them.
I think that's it.
I can respect it.
They know what they're doing and they do it well. So yes. I'm not going to salute them.
They have no illusions about themselves. They have no illusions about any of this. I mean, they're terrible for the country, but you gotta respect the honesty.
It reminds me of that tweet. It's like, correction to my last, you do not under any circumstances have to hand it to ISIS, right? So that's kind of how I think about the Bloc. I don't want to hand it to them, but so I just thought that was a banger. One of my Conservative Party buddies who's probably listening right now had said to me, my God, to have one day where I can speak as freely as the typical Bloc MP, which made me laugh.
It does kind of make you want to move to Quebec to run as a Bloc MP just for the shits
and just run on a campaign of fuck it all.
Yeah.
Like, my French ain't up to it, but And I would be the only non-separatist Bloc East, but yeah. Okay, so I want to read you a different quote, though, and this also from the Canadian Press. So I want to just beg the indulgence of the listeners and the viewers here, because I got to click into the different tab. This is from the Canadian Press, and it's quoting Ontario Liberal MP Marcus Pawlowski, who's a doctor in non-political life, and he kind of reached for a medical metaphor, we could say, when talking about what happened to the Liberals. So let me read you what the Canadian Press quoted him as saying. First of all, the Canadian Press, in a non-quote, says, he thinks the party needs just more time to turn things around. And here's the quote from the MP. "You don't expect a bone to heal overnight. It takes time. I think similarly in politics. And yes, I know, and we know, that the Canadian populace is angry for a whole bunch of reasons, but time changes a lot of things. First of all, no, I don't think it does. I think sometimes time just makes things worse. This is not a broken bone. This is an abscess, I think, for the Liberals. And you don't want to dick around with that one. But that actually isn't the thing he said that I thought was really interesting. There's a couple of these piling up. Every once in a while, Liberals tell the truth. They just don't mean to. It happens by accident. Here's one of them. Here is, again, Ontario Liberal MP, the doctor, Marcus Pawlowski, who said, he talked about how there's going to be, he was describing how Justin Trudeau has matured as a leader and he thinks he's going to be able to pull it off. And the MP said, the first election in 2015 was all about he's sexy, blah, blah, blah. If he's going to win this election, it's on substance and who he is and his policies. So, okay.
Yeah, I think that's correct.
Well, this is where I, being the asshole in the room, put my hand up for the quick question here. Dr. Pawlowski, if we accept that if Justin Trudeau wins this election, it's going to be on who he is, on substance, and on his policies, surely the same holds true if he loses the election. So let's just do a quick search and replace in the MP's comments here. If he loses the election, I'm going to read the quote right now because I'm that twisted. Here's an alternate universe where I'm just finding and replacing this. So here is Liberal MP, Dr. Marcus Pawlowski. The first election in 2015 was all about he's sexy, blah, blah, blah. If he's going to lose this election, it's on substance and who he is and his policies.
Also exactly correct for exactly the same reasons. Yeah.
There's a great, the listeners and the viewers know I'm a big fan of Rush, Canadian prog rock trio. And there's a great line from one of their songs where it says, good work is the key to good fortune. Winners stake that claim. Losers seldom take that blame. So my proposal to the MP and to all the Liberal caucus is that we agree that if the Liberals win the next election, it is entirely due to the personality of the Prime Minister, the substance he and his party offer, and the policies they advocate for. My only request is that they stipulate that the reverse holds true as well. And if they lose the upcoming election, it's because of the Prime Minister, their substance, and their policies. Why do I get the feeling they're not going to want to do that? If they lose the next election, it's going to be about voter fatigue. It's going to be about disinformation. It's going to be about evil conservatives and hedge fund backed US owned post media. If they win it, it's because they're great guys. If they lose it, it's because something Conrad Black.
Disinformation. Yeah. Anyway, Matt, that reminded me of a video that I happened to run into when I was falling down the YouTube rabbit hole the other day.
No.
It's this video, and it's an old video. I think it was released at least 3 years ago, but I remember seeing this years and years and years ago. So there's nothing new about this video, but just looking at it, it is this clip between Justin Trudeau and Sophie. And I'm sorry, I just have to cough for a second.
How dare you? What an outrage.
Yeah, that wasn't a coded cough. I literally
that was a formidable cough. By the way.
No, and I just drank coffee the wrong way. But anyway, so it's this clip between Sophie and Trudeau back when they were still together. They're at some kind of a political party, I think a political fundraiser together. They both look fabulous. They look a lot younger. Trudeau still has the mop of hair, so I don't know exactly when this was, but my guess is that it was maybe before
Probably freaking out.
2015.
Even before that.
Yeah, I think it could be quite old. I don't know exactly when, but it started to really make the rounds again about 3 years ago, and I noticed that it's now making the rounds again through the YouTube algorithm. And I'm going to describe this video to you because it's kind of grainy footage, but it's clearly Trudeau and Sophie. They're at a party. You can hear a lot of background noise. And Sophie is caught on camera, probably a camera phone, saying something like, "I really admire you." And Trudeau says, "I was put on this planet to do this." And Sophie says, he says, "I fight and I win. That's what I'm good at." Sophie kind of goes, and he goes, "But it's true, honey." And Sophie says, "You fight from the good place. Be humble." And the reason why that particular clip really struck out for me was going like, this guy hasn't changed at all. This is exactly it in a nutshell. This is who he thinks he is. He thinks that he has been put on this planet Earth to do this, to fight and win. It's like I said, I've written about this before, but the guy's got a messianic complex like nobody's business. And I just want to say, as a further to that, if your vision here is that he's matured as a person in office, where's the evidence of that? Because this clip looks like it's from well before, maybe 2012, 2013, maybe a Papineau party fundraiser level. And it's clear that he still thinks of himself this way. It's the same guy.
I had a Twitter thread years ago where I talked about, I didn't write it as a column. I don't know why I didn't. Probably did that stupid thing we do sometimes where we tweet instead of just writing. But the column I wrote was, the Twitter thread I wrote was about the winning move. And I said, sometimes I think one of the worst things that can happen to someone early in life, is that they figure out what their winning move is. And the winning move can be that you're really smart, that you're a gifted athlete, that you got just great gift of gab, you're very charming and charismatic. It could be that you're physically attractive, but that you're lopsidedly all in on one asset.
Mm-hmm.
And some people have got that great throwing arm because they can really throw a football, or natural hockey talent, or they're just gorgeous and they turn that into an athletic career or a modeling career, or they're a great charismatic person. They turn that into a great political career, and so on and so forth. Some of these people play the same card every day of their life. And it's so powerful, it wins every hand. But what can happen sometimes is that one of these people who is so lopsidedly good at one thing that they have never developed any other talent set, they come up with a scenario where their one winning move doesn't work and they're helpless. I would rather a well-rounded person who's got 6 or 7 out of 10 across the board than a person who's 10 out of 10 and then a whole lot of 3s. And I think Justin Trudeau continually tries to do the Sunny Ways charm thing, and it just hasn't worked in years.
Matt,
Jen.
He fights and he wins. This is what he was put on this earth to do.
But what is he actually good at? And I asked that question sincerely.
Well, he's been the prime minister for 9 years, man.
Oh, no, I wasn't saying nothing. I was going to say
he's fought and he's won a lot because this is what he was put on earth to do.
Justin Trudeau's greatest political assets are a degree of family pedigree, personal charm. He's still a great retail politician, particularly in small groups. I don't know if you've ever watched him work a crowd. I have. He's really good at it. You can feel it. The guy crackles with the energy that you can feel if you're attuned to. And he's, to some people, attractive. And this was enough. This was enough to get him
put his earth to do.
The problem is what he's good at and what he thinks he's good at aren't necessarily the same thing.
He was made to be good at those things, Matt. To fight and win.
To fight and win, yeah. I think
look,
when
I
we
don't
look
want
at government,
speaking of white men who are overly blessed in one particular area of life.
that was a better segue than what I was going to have. But yeah, sure.
There we go. I think we could go ahead. Let's talk about Mark Carney very briefly, because Mark Carney is sort of back in the news again. again.
What am I going to say? Like,
what am I going to say? So let's report the news. Okay. So he's been
Mark Carney has agreed to be the special economic advisor to the prime minister.
Great. Super. And he's taking a partisan party role in this capacity. So as not to subject himself to the humiliation and the depredation of an actual election, which smart. I think that's smart. And also I think it's clearly sort of him attempting to wheedle his way back into Canadian politics in a way where he eats none of the loss of the next election, but also sets himself up for a privileged position to be leader once Trudeau goes down.
I couldn't actually affect change as an advisor.
In the 5 minutes I was, there in that particular role. So, I mean, look, someone made this mention to me, and I'm sorry I can't quote him directly, but I'm sure he won't mind me mentioning it, is that what a lot of people are still coming to terms with is that this is still PR. Mark Carney is not going to make a substantive
PR is Trudeau's
realignment. Mark Carney is not going to make a substantive realignment in Canadian economic policy, particularly as it's trying to scrape together another week in Parliament by, paying off the Bloc and the NDP. Like that's fantasy land. This is PR for everyone involved. It's PR for the Liberals. It's PR for Trudeau, because now we can say I've got a heavy hitter on my advising me on economic policy, and it's PR for Carney. So moving on. That's exactly as much attention as I think it requires.
The problem for the Liberals here is sort of like that old joke, like we've tried one thing and we're all out of ideas, right? Like,
PR is the only thing that they've tried. Yeah.
I think we see this sometimes, occasionally in their comments. Like one of the things, and you and I have laughed about this, and we've talked about it in dispatches and podcasts, is that there really does seem to be a significant faction of the Liberal Party of Canada Brain Trust who thinks that, oh man, if only our comms were better. They don't realize that they're all comms. The problem isn't that their one thing isn't as good as it could be. It's that there's nothing else. So with a guy like Mark Carney, you can run him as an MP. You can try to install him as leader. You can start grooming him behind the scenes to be a successor leader after some future electoral wipeout. But no, what they're doing is the announcement that he's taken on a special role that will, I'm sure, produce a white paper or action plan or something. It's all going to be comms. Mm-hmm. It's all these guys do. And Trudeau, he wouldn't probably describe himself this way, but that's what he is. He's a communicator. That's what he's actually been good at. That's why he won the Liberal leadership. It's why he won in 2015. It's not cutting it now. And there seems to be something missing in their knowledge set or their roster of advisors. They don't seem to realize they're missing something. And I guess maybe if, like, you don't always know what you're missing. Kind of, I'm going to go Rumsfeldian here. Maybe it's an unknown.
No, to know what you're missing, you need to surround yourself with people who genuinely challenge you and can demonstrate dissent within that. And this is something that this particular party has demonstrably shown that it is allergic to. It cannot tolerate internal dissent. It does not have a mechanism for tolerating that. Except on, fringe culture war issues that really don't affect governance very much.
You can tolerate dissent, but I think what they can't do is learn from it.
Maybe. On that note, I've got two little quick things. So let's like and subscribe. Put a note in it right there. I got the two final things we have are kind of federal politics, but they're fun. So stick around. Check us out at www.readtheline.ca and like and subscribe if you haven't.
Yeah, it's fun, just like the rest of the podcast. So much fun.
We're very fun. I think we're very fun. Matt, now that we're back, two very, very quick little items that I wanted to flag for our lovely Line podcast listeners. You are the bestest of all people. One was this book review that appeared by Howard Anglin, who, if you don't know him, he's sort of well known in conservative circles. Really kind of too clever by half guy. I really like Howard. But anyway, he wrote this really brutal, wonderful, gloriously scathing book review of a book about crime and drug treatment that was written by Ben Perrin. Now, for people who do not know who Mr. Perrin is Perrin did work briefly with the Stephen Harper Prime Minister's office, and then became, how should I say this? I've spoken about this on the podcast before about how lucrative the converted conservative career track is for people who are public intellectuals in Canada. So these are people who are devoted conservative pundits or worked in a conservative prime minister's office or had strong ideological commitments, at least ostensibly, to conservatism, then having a come to Jesus moment at some point in their careers and finding themselves rapidly embraced by the left-wing intelligentsia in this country. And bluntly, the intelligentsia in this country is overwhelmingly left-wing in my perspective. So, these are people who know who cut the checks, essentially. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that all of their conversions are insincere. Oftentimes they are sincere. They're just...
A lot of the time they're sincere.
A lot of the time I think they really are sincere. And I do think that it can be very normal for people who get into politics for strong ideological reasons or strong values-based commitment reasons can oftentimes be put off by the realities of what politics is once they see it on the inside and to have an aversion to it after the fact. I think that's really normal. I just think it's also should be stated that it's now a well-established path, right? This whole, that people who turn their faces from conservatism in a very public and obvious way very often find themselves with comfortable landing pads on the other side of the ideological divide.
In the Senate.
Yeah, in the Senate, exactly, right? But anyway, so Ben Perrin is one of these figures, and he's one of these people who was very much turned off by his perception of a conservative drug policy. He became very much a war on drugs is bad type of writer. And I think he became a law professor, and then he writes this book about crime and how basically it all needs to be trauma informed, yada, yada, yada. I won't get into the details of the book because it doesn't matter. What matters is that Howard Anglin writes a review for this book in the Hub, and it's a very kind of deliciously pointed review, as you would expect from him. But at the bottom of this review, there was this little note that I thought was some really delightful tea, and is worth sharing. Because, and I'll just read it out loud here, because Perrin has built up his credentials in the Canadian intellectual space, in part because of his role with the Harper PMO. It's an integral part of the credibility that he now carries in the space. So it's fair game.
The people who make the conversion have to be high value enough to be worth taking.
Exactly. So it is now, so it is therefore totally fair game for Anglin and other conservatives to point to his record in the Prime Minister's office. And Anglin does that very thing. And I will say this. I'm quoting Anglin directly here. I debated whether it was worth mentioning Perrin's record as a staffer in the Harper government in a book review, but since he has made the vocal repudiation of that work his professional calling card, his apology for his time in the PMO, which manages to be both simpering and self-important, is one of the book's most nauseating passages, I concluded that it's not just relevant, but important. I will, however, spare you the full litany of his disservice, as one story suffices to paint the picture. Oh, do tell, Mr. Anglin. Tell us about this one story. Again, back to Anglin. Perrin, as you probably don't remember, he doesn't mention it much himself, was the liaison between then PMO's Chief of Staff Nigel Wright and Senator Mike Duffy's lawyer for the negotiation of the terms of the $90,000 payment to Duffy. This was particularly shocking considering that at the time he considered himself to be the, quote, Prime Minister's lawyer, a nonsensical title for a partisan staffer, ... But somehow he never got around to telling the Prime Minister what he was doing behind his back. Now, I'm not actually sure that little tidbit's found its way into public and other spaces, but, I may have missed it. Totally possible. The Duffy scandal was some time ago now, and in hindsight looks absolutely quaint, doesn't it not? But also, it's a really interesting fact that Mr. Perrin apparently was the one who was according to Anglin, the liaison between that particular payoff, and that Harper himself was totally in the dark about it. I'm not sure if that details come out in other contexts, but I sure find it an interesting little sip of old tea, and I thought one worth rehashing in the context of this podcast. Now, I have nothing more to say about that particular matter, and all legal matters can therefore be sent over to the hub and Mr. Anglin, as I was quoting directly. Thank you very much, Mr. Perrin.
Do you,
However,
do you recall the plot line of Eternal Sunshine of a Spotless Mind?
no, but let's not get into that because we don't have time right now. We're running out.
I'll do it in 30 seconds.
Okay.
It is a movie about sort of like this. It's set in the present time, but like the technology has existed to erase memories in a targeted way. And people who are struggling to get over broken hearts will go to the service and the whole relationship will just be erased from their memory. I think I did that with the Duffy scandal.
Yeah, that's fair.
Like all of those neurons have been targeted and destroyed with prejudice. I remember there was one.
There was one. And it was, like I said, I never begrudged stuff making the news because how politics actually functions is always good news. But I just think when you look at like what happened from the SNCL Lavalin scandal on, it just makes the Duffy situation look quaint.
Mike Duffy, whatever happened to him. And then the gap in my memory.
Right. Anyway, doesn't matter. Next point I just wanted to make a note is a friend of the line, Michelle Rampel-Garner. She's written for us over at the line. She's actually got a piece on her Substack about her approach to the Conservatives' version of the Online Harms Act. So she is proposing changes to Canadian law to deal with real online harms, particularly in terms of child porn and harassment. And she's trying to negotiate changes and real reforms that don't impinge upon civil liberties the way that Bill C-63 does. I haven't read through her entire version of the bill, but it looks like it is one of the things that the Conservatives are looking to table. I know that she's put a lot of time and effort and thought into this, and she talks to the right people about these kinds of issues and problems. So I actually think it could be totally worth a read, totally worth checking out. And I'm just duly noting. My grasp of English is top
Duly
notch.
noting.
Duly noting this for listeners of our podcast and our dispatch.
I saw Michelle's piece and I bookmarked it because I do want to read it because I know she is engaged in the space. I remember when the Liberal Online Harms Act came out and you wrote a fairly detailed column about it. I read it, and the thing that jumped out at me about it was that they had 80% of a perfectly good bill, and they had 20% that was a nightmare.
Yep.
And I don't I guess I do understand because as we've talked about, they're not good at the politics stuff. Everything is comms to them. If they had cleaved off the 20% of the controversial stuff for a follow-up bill and had referred it to a task force or a committee or something, and then they went with the kind of the clean bill of the 80% of stuff that was not controversial, it would probably be law by now, but they didn't. So I wonder, I'm going to go read Michelle's piece sometime this weekend when I have some time. But I wonder if the Conservative bill is the 80% of the Liberal bill that actually made sense.
I actually think it's a little bit more comprehensive than that.
I'll go take a look.
Yeah, it's worth taking a look. Anyway, there it goes.
Let me take 1 minute for a final comment here. And you said you had 2 points, and I want to slip in a third here because we probably should have done it before when we were talking our general federal mishmash. Pascal Saint-Onge, the heritage minister, put out a video on Twitter X. I'm not going to comment on what I consider to be its extremely Trudeau Liberal era communications style. But what it is, if
you
we
mean
boil
the fact
it down,
that she's talking to us like a kindergarten teacher?
Yep.
Right. Okay, that one. Got it.
But I think more to the point, it is a call. It is a direct message to the CBC and its employees. And the thrust of it is basically, we love you, but what you are currently isn't working. And how many times have you and I here at the line made that exact case that you and I are both supporters of us CBC, but not necessarily the one that we have? And we've been talking all in the first half hour or so of the podcast of like what the Liberals are actually going to do in 6 to 12 months. Sure. They're going to reform the CBC. Yeah. They're going to trade pensions or, sign over Labrador to Quebec or something. I don't know. They're going to do something insane to get enough block votes to survive 6 to 12 months, which will buy them just enough time to save the CBC by structurally reforming it. Yes. Okay, yes, Minister Saint-Onge. Absolutely. That is something I have high confidence in your ability to pull off in the time available.
I'm happy that the Liberals are coming around to a position that we had 6 months ago, if not a year ago.
Years ago.
That is that years ago. that the CBC is good in principle but needs radical reform and has major internal problems that need to be fixed. That's correct. That's correct. That's the correct diagnosis of the problem. So good for her for recognizing it. But let's be clear here. There's 5,000 employees at the CBC across the nation. A mandate review and a serious reform that actually addresses these problems in a way that's not merely superficial or communications based is a years-long project. That is years. Somebody who's very passionate about public broadcasting is going to have to devote years of their lives to. It's not going to be me.
Or counterpoint, they can wing it in the next 6 to 12 months while the NDP and the Bloc alternate holding a gun to their head.
Yeah, sure. That's also...
You know what?
That's an option.
Put it on Mark Carney's list. Special Advisor for Economics and the Future of the CBC.
Matt,
hey, Mark, go.
Matt, this is...
boom, starter pistol. You're off.
This is what they were put here to do, Matt. They fight
and to win.
On that note, I think we're good. I think that's just where we stop it.
Yeah, we're great.
Great. Love you guys all. Once again, www.readtheline.ca. Check us out. Our written dispatch will be out either Saturday or Sunday, depending on how much of my life my children take from me. We will see you all soon. We got stuff lined up for next week, and we'll see where Parliament goes.
Save the CBC. You have 5 days. It's like bad 1980s action. This is basically the plot of Escape from New York. So thanks, everybody. Like and subscribe. Today's podcast was brought to you by Unsmoke Canada. Now is the time to modernize Canadian laws so that adult smokers have information and access to better alternatives. By doing so, we can create lasting change. Learn more at unsmoke.ca.